don't see the same kind of thing on the other side. Al Sharpton is a Democrat kingmaker. If you Google Al Sharpton and Democrat kingmaker, you need to stand back. This is a man who, during the Crown Heights riot of 1991, said if the Jews want to pin their yarmulkes on their hat, they can come over to my house and get it on. That's just one of a series of offensive things this man has said over the years, yet he is a Democrat kingmaker. And if your newspaper ever wrote anything denouncing Al Sharpton for those kinds of things, I never saw it. He's in the streets of Ferguson yelling, "No justice, no peace," before one word, Jim, one word of testimony was taken. And as you know, the officer was completely exonerated. So this thing has been completely unfair to me. You have looked at stuff that I've said years ago out of context. I've been on radio for 27 years. Most of my career I was on for 4 hours. That's almost 27,000 hours of radio. I've also been a syndicated column since April of 1998, never missing a week. I think 1 week I took off for Christmas. The LA Times has never published a single article I've ever written. LA Daily News carries my column. Orange County Register carries my column. You guys have never printed a single column that I've read. I published about a half a dozen books, including collections of my columns. 2 of my books were New York Times bestsellers. 2 of them were LA Times bestsellers. You've never reviewed any of my books, even negatively. I did a documentary that came out last year on Juneteenth called Uncle Tom, An Oral History of the Black Conservative. It grossed more money than the 5 films that were nominated for Best Documentary combined, had a higher IMDb rating than any of the ones that was nominated. We hired a consultant to contact a bunch of newspapers, including yours, to try to get somebody to write something about it. You never did. 2 people in your newspaper over the years have written columns about, I've written pieces about me. One, a guy named John Mitchell, which I thought was a fair piece. Another one named Patrick Goldstein, who I think is still with the LA Times, also wrote a fair piece. Outside of that, it's been radio-free silence on Larry Elder my entire career, even though I'm from Los Angeles, from the hood, went to public schools, the kind of story you guys love to talk about on Spectrum One, which I get. I get Spectrum One, and on the morning, there'll be somebody about somebody from LA who's been an artist, somebody from LA who's a writer, somebody from LA who's a dancer, somebody from LA who's a filmmaker, but you've never, ever, ever interviewed me for any of my stuff, ever. It is completely unfair. I know you don't like my politics. I don't like high taxes. I don't like high regulation. I want secure borders, all of which you guys are opposed to. You supported, for example, Proposition 16, for crying out loud, to use race again as a factor for college admissions and for hiring and for contracting. And when the voters in 1996, I think it was, voted against that, you guys wanted to restore it. I think it's a racist agenda, a racist bill, and yet you supported that. So calling me the blackface of white supremacy, calling me all but a David Duke, that's the premise here. So I hope this doesn't degenerate into a witch hunt. I hope this really is a friendly or a fair interview with the 2 of you. But I have my suspicions.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you got that. We're able to get that off your chest. And I understand that you're not happy with the LA Times coverage.
Well, are you happy with my being called the blackface of white supremacy, Jim? Is that okay with you?
I'm not really here to comment on our last 30 years of coverage of you or our recent.
No, I'm talking about the last week.
Yeah, I'm not really here to represent. That's a column by one of our colleagues, and I'm. What
do you think of me being called the blackface of white?
And of course, he wouldn't give his opinion, nor would the other woman who interviewed me at the same time. But by the way, when I started out my campaign, I have a communications director. And I was interviewed by a young man for one of the newspapers up north. I think it was a Sacramento newspaper. And before the interview started, I said, "Have you ever voted for a Republican?" And he went, "Well, I said, "Have you ever voted for a Republican?" "Oh, I'm not quite sure why you asked." "What do you mean you're not quite sure why I asked?" "I want to make sure I'm being treated fairly. And it seems to me if you've never voted for a Republican, the likelihood is that you're not going to conduct a fair interview because human beings are human beings, and that suggests bias. So have you ever voted for a Republican?" And he would not give me his answer. Later on, my communications director said that I started out the interview in a combative way, and she didn't think that was very wise. I said, "I disagree." I said, too many Republicans just roll over and play dead when these left-wing people interview them without exposing their bias. I'm not going to do that. And throughout the campaign, I did that over and over and over again to reporters who were asking me questions. And after a while, she realized that maybe I was right. And after a while, she no longer objected to my having a, quote, combative style, close quote, which I was accused of. I don't have a combative style. I'm just standing up. I won't be pushed around. and I'm not angry, I'm passionate about what I consider to be media bias, which is hurting Republicans. How do you explain why Democrats are ignoring rising crime, rising homelessness, decline in the quality of public schools, rolling brownouts, water shortages? How do you explain all of this? You explain it because the LA Times either downplays these kinds of issues or they ignore them altogether. Look at the borders. If it weren't for Fox making CNN and MSNBC cover what's going on down there, a lot of people would be completely unaware that the total reversal of Donald Trump's policies has caused now some 2 million illegal aliens to be in this country, most of whom will be given a court date and they won't show up.